All right, we're not going to rebound. We're just going to go straight into the class. So we ended with the phrase hyphen in the process of being nearsighted slant without perspicacity, comma. And I didn't give you the exegesis of that, so that's where we're going to pick it up. We start off without any form of punctuation, but yet it's an independent phrase. And therefore we see that Peter is simply stating another quality, and so we have a break here, which I've indicated by a hyphen. It's actually a very abrupt. He says one thing, and then without transitioning into it, he says something else. There's no conjunction, there's not a nor or an and or anything like that. He just says it, and then he says something else, which is very close to it. So I've decided to include that. We don't have that very often, but I've decided to include that by just the hyphen. Next, we have a present active participle. You could have guessed that because I did it as an ing word or a process. Present active participle, masculine nominative singular of the verb muopadzo. Muopadzo. M-U-O-P-A-D-Z long O. Muopadzo. And muopadzo is actually another compound. It comes from muo, M-U-O, and muo means to close or to shut. And then it's added to ops, O-P-S, which means your eyes. Okay? And so together we get to shut the eyes, to wink, to blink, to have partial sight, or to be nearsighted. But it's then extended to mean, in terms of the mental capacity, as opposed to the ocular capacity, it means to be slow to understand, to have limited understanding, so as to not realize something, to not comprehend, to not have perception or insight, or to not have perspicacity. Perspicacity is the ability to understand things and have insight. Okay? So if you haven't heard that word before, I'm increasing your vocabulary. Okay. So I've translated it, of course, as without perspicacity. So it's being nearsighted. That's the literal, but the mental is being without perspicacity. The reason I translated it with the theme of sight, but also added the connotation that Peter's really using is because he had sight in there before. And so the present tense here, once again, gives us the idea of action in process. And the participial form gives us the concept of, in English, gerund. So we have the whole thing being in the process of being nearsighted, slant without perspicacity. In other words, it doesn't say lacking. In the English translation, it says one without these qualities is lacking and nearsighted, or lacking and, I think it says nearsighted. But the idea is that it's not that, it's not having the mental perspicacity. See, that's the old, we use the phrase, that you can't see beyond the end of your nose. We're not talking about, being blind beyond the end of your nose. It's like when you can't see beyond the end of your nose, the phrase there means that you can't put 2 and 2 together and get 4. Okay, you have no common sense. Okay, you may have book learning, but you have no common sense. We've run into people like that. They are very good at being able to recite something, but trying to be able to use it or trying to have an understanding of common sense, they just don't make it. There were some people, Thomas had a real good friend, the guy was just brilliant, but he just couldn't understand other individuals, and they were just foreign to him. He had no ability to, and so consequently he didn't necessarily have common sense relative to the way other people act. And it was funny because they were playing a game one time between he and my daughter Libby, and Libby knew that she was going to lose, so she decided that she was just going to take everybody out. She was going to do, scorched earth, take everybody. And so she made this move that caused him to get wiped out, and he couldn't figure out why she did that, right? You're going to lose. Why did you wipe me out? Right? Why did you make that move? It made you lose. You would have had 3 more moves. And she's like, yeah, but 3 more moves, I still would have lost, and I would have been able to take you out, right? So it was kind of an interesting dynamics. Okay, so we have in the process of being nearsighted slant without perspicacity, after having received forgetfulness. after having received forgetfulness. It's an interesting phrase here. We start here with an aorist active participle, and it's a masculine nominative singular, and the verb is lambano. And we've seen lambano before. Lambano means to take or to receive. And in the singular, see, Peter has gone from the group, he's gone to individuals, and so he's talking about, at the beginning of this, we have the individual in whom. Okay, so we're talking about a particular individual. So here in the singular, we're talking about that individual, which has not put this information together. Okay, so here in the aorist, we get the concept of something completed and looked at as a single completed action, and as a participle, we have the concept of having received. Okay, not just received or just have that you are forgetful. See, it's not are forgetful. If you are forgetful, forgetful is an adjective, or it's not what we have here. Okay, we actually have a noun. Okay, so we have after having received, and then we have the feminine accusative singular, and it's a noun. The noun is lethe, L long E T H long E, lethe. See, the general translator says, something like being. It doesn't even say being forgetful. It's like are forgetful, or they don't have it as a noun. They have it as an adjective. Here it's a noun. You have received forgetfulness. So like I say, know that we have a noun and not a verb. So we simply don't have having forgotten. That's what I'm trying to say. In the the general translators, they say lacking and having forgotten. It's not having forgotten. That would be a noun. A verb or an adjective. Here it's a noun. Okay. So we have, in the process of being nearsighted slant without perspicacity, after having received forgetfulness, concerning the cleansing of his previous sins. Period. What's interesting is there's a little bit of textual criticism here. I don't go into it because it's so clear, but there was a version of the Greek New Testament that did not have this final phrase. And in fact, that was a version, apparently, I think that the Colonel used, because when the Colonel translated this, he said that this phrase doesn't exist in the original languages, but it does in all the newer versions of the Nestle-Aland New Testament. It has it. Okay, it talks a little bit about how it had accidentally gotten left out in version 24, I think it was, or 23. It's now version 25. Okay, and so it is there. Okay. And we start this last phrase. We started with masculine genitive singular of a noun, katharismos. 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 And katharismos is a cognate of catharsis, which we know in the English. A catharsis is when you have purged your soul. Remember when we talked about the Greek plays? Again, Peter's kind of going back to the idea of the Greek play. The Greek play was a catharsis. It was the opportunity for the audience to unburden their souls by having empathy for the actors and for the story that's in there, and that's called the catharsis. When we use it in English, when someone has a catharsis, it's like they have all this emotion bottled up and they just go, okay, not quite like that, but that's what storytelling is supposed to do, is to make you go and get rid of your stuff. Okay, well, that's the cognate here, and we have katharismos, and so katharismos actually means a ceremonial cleansing or purification. It means to cleanse from ritual contamination. Here in the genitive, we would literally have of the cleansing, but the idea is concerning the cleansing. Of is about, about slant concerning the cleansing, and therefore that's the way I've translated it. Concerning the cleansing. I'm going to take the next part literally, and then we'll straighten it out. It is our kind of a form of unemphatic possession. We start here with an articular verb of time called It's Palais. Palai, actually, AI is I like an isle. Palai, Palai. I see that, and I had an electromechanics professor. He taught antennas and wave theory, and his name was Dr. Palais. it was like this, only it was French, had the S on the end of it. And the thing that I remember is that the guy was skinny as a rail. He was a runner, and he used to run from rim to rim, okay, of the Grand Canyon. Okay, that was what he did for fun. But he wasn't a very good professor. Everybody used to call him Dr. Xerox because all he did was teach exactly out of the book. He didn't give you any additional application or anything like that. So if you could read the book, you could pass his class, and you didn't ever really need to go to class. But anyway, except he was writing the book. That was the problem. And so you had to buy the book at the at the bookstore. I mean, at the Xerox place. Anyway, Palai. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Palai meaning long ago, of old, or former. And obviously it comes to mean previous when used as an adverb. With the article, because it is articular, with the article we have the previous. This is then followed by the masculine genitive singular of the third person pronoun that we've seen before, autos, A-U-T-O-S. And autos means he, she, it, he, him, them, or he, her, them. And in the masculine singular, we would have him. And then finally, we get a feminine genitive. We have the feminine genitive plural of the noun hamartia. H-A-R, or H-A-M-A-R-T-I-A. Hamartia. And hamartia means a missing of the mark. And of course, it comes to be a technical Christian word meaning sin. And in the plural, it's sins. Okay? And so literally we have the previous of him sins, which is actually the non-emphatic form of possession of his previous sins. So altogether, we have, for you see, the one in whom these things are not continually present is blind, in the process of being nearsighted, slant without perspicacity, after having received forgetfulness concerning the cleansing of his previous sins. Now we're ready for the analysis. Point 1. Once again, Peter is using this introductory transition to further explain the importance of the previous information in the life of the believer. And I'm not going to repeat point 1 from above, but it's exactly the same thing because the last verse started with the same thing. For you see, and so the idea is that this phrase is meant to perk our ears up, since whenever we're given an explanation in the Bible, it's always grace and always extremely important. God doesn't need to explain these things to us, and when he does, we need to pay attention. And here, of course, Peter's using this transition to the concept of the status that we are in if we do not construct this course of 7 in our souls. Okay? Point 2. Peter then makes this information personal by stating, quote, the one in whom these things are not continually present, period, end quote. So Peter makes this information personal by stating the one in whom these things are not continually present. Subpoint A. Peter could have simply stated, comma, quote, those who don't have these, end quote, semicolon. But, comma, you will note that construction is not as strong or as pointed as the one we have. The reader, comma, or each of us in this case, is supposed to look at this and do an introspective to see if he is a, quote, one in whom, dot, 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 end quote, period. See, in other words, Peter's literary style, when we look at the literary style, we've talked about that before in looking at books in the Bible. Okay, when Peter's literary style is very good because he starts off kind of with a group. He's talking to this group of individuals, right? And then he is bringing it right down to the individual himself. And so rather than saying those who, he's saying the one in whom this is not, okay? And the idea is you're supposed to look at yourself and go, like, is he talking to me? Am I one of those, right? And that gives you the self-reflection, the introspection, as I said here, right? The self-reflection to say and evaluate yourself and say, do I have these? Do I have these 7 things? Is he talking to me? And of course the answer is, if he is, then you better fix the situation, right? And if he's not, you're okay. Of course, that doesn't mean don't listen to the rest of it. Okay. The idea is you listen to the rest of it just so that when you do become one, because we all eventually become one, we all continue to sin, right? Remember, we don't believe in the idea that I've never sinned once I became a believer, right? You become a believer, you're going to sin. And the nice thing is, though, you just have the mechanics to handle getting out of that status of what? Carnality. That's what we talked about, right? Getting out of being carnal. Okay, so the idea is you may not be the one right now, but you may be the one in the future, and you need to do this introspection. We're supposed to be constantly updating our soul to God, making sure that He understands when we're functioning properly, and when we're malfunctioning, we make sure that we get back into functioning properly, letting Him know our desires and our druthers, so that we can have impact for Him as well as get grace. Okay, so He's making it very personal. Subpoint B. Then, of course, quote, these things, end quote, refers once again to the 7 characteristics of a mature, properly functioning believer. Subpoint C. The phrase, quote, are not continually present, end quote, is stronger than the simple translation, quote, lacking, period, end quote. If you don't happen to have your Bible with you, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 9, in the New American Standard, for example, says, "For he who lacks these qualities is blind." Okay? He who lacks. It's much stronger than just lacking or lacks. The King James Version uses lacking, I believe. So anyway, this is stronger than simple translation, lacking. You can lack, continue the point, you can lack something for a short time, and then make it up. But the concept here is that the believer is not making it up. So, you can be you're lacking due to a simple mistake, for instance, but here he's actively keeping these things from being present in his soul. Okay? Continue the point. The concept of, quote, lacks, end quote, is a status whereas the concept of not continually present implies a process. The connotation here is that this believer is not just carnal, or out of fellowship, but rather he is in reversionism. Two more sentences. As we saw in the exegesis, comma quote, the most constant characteristic of the present indicative is that it denotes action in progress. And that's from Burton's New Testament Greek Grammar. Okay? So last sentence. So this believer is actively staying out of the divine dynasphere. Point 3. The result of this continuous action is that, quote, he is blind, and his blind is underlined, period, end quote. Peter emphasizes this. So these believers will truly understand that their inaction or failure to develop these qualities has consequences. So point A. The result of ignoring doctrine is not that you simply don't grow, but that you go blind, semicolon. You have spiritual blindness. So you can't operate on doctrinal principles if you don't stay inside the divine dynasphere, because you don't have the ability to use those doctrinal principles. You go blind. Okay? And you don't develop these divine principles if you don't get in the divine dynasphere and learn in the first place. But the idea here is that by not developing these things, it's not just that you don't develop them, it's that you regress, you go blind. Okay? Subpoint B. Blindness here is equivalent to a lack of doctrine or the development of scar tissue in the soul, also called blackout of the soul. That's a term the Colonel used. Now, note that these are two different things. The lack of doctrine, okay, is blindness. In other words, you don't have the information you need to see the plan of God, the information to appreciate the plan of God, the information to see grace, appreciate grace, understand what God has provided for you. All these wonderful things that we get to see as properly functioning believers. That comes from understanding doctrine. Well, if you have a lack of doctrine, you don't have that. The other side of the other way of blindness, see, one way, if you want to use the analogy, one way is being born blind, never having the opportunity to see. Right? That's one way. That's the guy that doesn't learn any doctrine. He becomes a believer and he never grows. Right? That's like the guy that's been born blind. The other one is the guy that gouges his eyes out and becomes blind. That's the concept of scar tissue. You get a soul full of doctrine, but then you become reversionistic and you carve away that information and instead replace it by human good and evil. And we've studied the idea of coming out of reversionism is very difficult. We saw it in James, where if there's an individual who is in deep reversionism and then finally decides that he wants to come out of it, the pastor's got to be willing to do that, because it's tough work. Because once you've accepted information and then turned around and unaccepted it, see, there's my alpha primitive negative in the English language. Okay, in other words, not just rejected it, but you had accepted it, right? And then you turn around and don't believe it, then it's hard to turn back around and believe it. Because it was there once, you cut it out and you develop this analogy as a scar tissue. Okay, you develop this scar tissue, and it's very hard to turn that scar tissue back into good skin again. Right? It's very hard to re-accept something that you've already rejected after having accepted it the first time. right? It's just human nature. So that's what we're talking about here is both of those. The failure to develop doctrine and the development of scar tissue, okay? We have Matthew 6, 22 and 23. I'm just going to read this for you real quick. I didn't exegete it. I do apologize. I wanted to get this in here, and it's pretty close in the English, and so I'm going to read it to you. Matthew 6, 22 and 23 says, "The lamp of the body is the eye." See, here we have the whole concept of the eye again and seeing. "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness." So the concept is, once again, that when you have scar tissue, you're evil. That's what filling with darkness it is. Okay, it says, "If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness?" In other words, what Matthew is saying, that if you have this evil in you, if you have darkness, it's just going to get worse. Okay. We have Jeremiah 13:16. Isaiah 59:9. Proverbs 4:19, which says, quote, "The way of the wicked is like darkness, semicolon. They do not know over what they stumble," period. Ephesians 5:8. Second Corinthians 4:6. Boing. Oh. Romans 2:19. I should say, and Romans 2:19. Romans 2:19 tells us that we're to be a guide to the blind. See, we're not supposed to be blind. We're supposed to be a guide to the blind, a light to those in whom there is darkness. Okay? So, Peter's making it very clear. You are blind, and that's what he's emphasizing. And so that's the reason, because he talked about blind, that's the reason I use nearsighted. I left the literal translation nearsighted in the other verse, is so that you have these two ocular analogies. Okay? But blind here means you have no mental function associated with doctrine, right? And then when we get to the nearsightedness is you can't really perceive it. You're too slow. Your spiritual IQ is because you don't have any spiritual IQ. You're malfunctioning. Okay, point 4. Peter then makes a hard break to further clarify. Sure, Peter then makes a hard break to further clarify. When he stated, quote, "is blind," comma, end quote, that is the status of the malfunctioning believer. But he also wants to give us the functional or operational process as well, quote, in the process of being nearsighted, slant without perspicacity, period, end quote. See, so one is the status, blind. The other is the process. You're winking your eye so that you're blind. You're jabbing yourself in the eye so that you're blind, whatever, right? Subpoint A. This phrase clearly tells us that we cannot understand God's plan when we are in the process of carnality or reversionism. We cannot have a grasp on reality. And we cannot appreciate or enjoy the Christian life. See, life passes you by when you're slow, okay? When you don't get it. I don't know if you've ever been in a group where they're talking about things that you just don't get, right? You know, it's a very, very bad feeling. It's something that you can't appreciate, right? It makes you actually get angry and go the other direction, right? So the idea here is you're in the process, when you're not developing these things, you're in the process of not getting life. You don't understand reality. We have a whole generation that doesn't understand reality. We have a whole generation that refuses to accept biology that says XX and XY are two different genders or sexes. Okay? We have a generation that doesn't understand right man, right woman, and the concept that is taught in the Bible. We have a whole generation that doesn't understand freedom. They want mama government to take care of them because they never want to grow up. We have this Peter Pan complex. If I don't grow up and I let the government take care of me, then I'm not responsible for anything. It's horrible. I've been spending some time lately going back and reviewing documents associated with our founding fathers. Go read some of the stuff Thomas Paine wrote. It'll bring tears to your eyes about what it takes to be free. And we are willing to give it up. We're willing to elect people because of their personality instead of their moral and their intellectual capabilities. How do we have 30-somethings in Congress that don't even know when the sun comes up? Which side of the earth the sun comes up on, right? Individual has no common sense, but somehow got elected because they said the right words and they said the right things to a generation of people who want to be taken care of and who are mad at the man on the internet, right? Anyway, they're blind. Subpoint B. When we are nearsighted or without perspicacity, we no longer have the ability to access our ECS, our edification complex of the soul, and can in no way have the capacity for life that God wants us to have. And without capacity for life, we can have no happiness. See, the way this Chorus of Seven goes together and the way we look at the divine dynasphere, the Colonel did a good job with illustration when he shows that, you start off with the filling of the Holy Spirit, then you have the relaxed mental attitude, then you have the ability to have enforced and genuine humility. Okay, you have the ability to have the perception and application of Bible doctrine. That's gate 4. Gate 5 are the motivational virtues, which then give you gate 6, which are the functional virtues. And the functional virtues are very closely tied to this Chorus of Seven, as we saw. The functional virtues then what? Develop capacity for life. And capacity for life, as gate 7 leads to gate 8, which is what? Plus 8, sharing the happiness of God. If you have no capacity for life, you cannot be happy. If you cannot appreciate the fact that where you are now is exactly where God wants you to be and have confidence in that, confidence in your position and plan in the plan of God, confidence in what the Word of God teaches, confidence in being able to handle the situations that come. If you don't have that confidence, if you don't have that capacity for life, you can in no way be happy. You're constantly looking over your shoulder. When's the other shoe going to drop? Right? Uh-oh, life's too good. It's going to have to get bad here in a second. Right? God never does that. Never gives me good things without whacking me upside the head. Well, maybe it's because you're stupid. But the idea is that you have to have these things to have happiness. Subpoint C. This brings home that doctrine is not just a part of your life, that you can do without occasionally, but it must be your life. No doctrine, no life. See, the Bible uses Zoe, right? Zoe is life, okay, as an intensive existence, something that is supposed to be enjoyed and to be understood. If you don't have doctrine, what you just have is an existence. See, there are people who just exist, right? I went to college with an individual that was an atheist. He didn't believe that there was any reason for mankind to be here except that a group of enzymes got in the right combination and mankind was created, right, out of the sludge of the earth, evolution, whatever, okay? And that when you die, that's it. You're here and you die. And so he just existed. What's the point of life? Oh, gee, poor me, right? I just happened to be born in this time frame, in this time, in this life, because of a random accident. What a horrible life. How can you have any happiness in that life? If you don't believe that God created you for a purpose, right, and that you are to function properly in God's plan so you fulfill that purpose, how can you have any kind of a life? So it takes doctrine to have a life. You want to have the best life there is? Have the most doctrine. You want to exist? Then don't come back. Okay? Subpoint D. The illustration is that if you are blind, or nearsighted. You cannot appreciate all of the wonderful grace that a sighted person can appreciate. You cannot understand or perceive the fine details and all of the visual grace that God gives us. So we are to use that analogy to understand that when you have failed to build the chorus of 7, then you cannot appreciate the wonderful grace that God provides to the properly functioning believer. And the last point, and we're going to get it here before we shut down. Subpoint E. Remember, comma, the bad part of being out of fellowship is not only the discipline that you receive, but the lack of blessing which you miss. That's part of the point in this phrase. That leaves us for point 5. We only have 2 more points, 5 and 6, and then we're ready to go into verse 10. So I almost made it through an entire verse in one Sunday. We'll get to that point. Okay? So with that, we're going to go ahead and end the second class with the